Women's History Month does not enjoy exactly the same status as Pride Month or Black History Month. Of the three sacred celebrations, Women's History Month, which began this week, is certainly the lowest on the totem pole. Still, it's an important and holy time on the leftist liturgical calendar, especially because it presents yet another opportunity to celebrate LGBT people. To be specific, Women's History Month is a time to celebrate men, gay men who masquerade as women. That's certainly how the Hershey's Corporation sees it anyway. That's why this week, as you've probably heard, the candy company unveiled its He for She campaign, which is meant to, quote, shine a light on the women and girls who inspire us every day. And they selected 5 women to be a part of this, so to be faces of this initiative. And each of the women will even have their likenesses adorn Hershey's chocolate bar wrappings for the duration of the month. But the interesting thing about one of these women is that he is not a woman at all, but rather a man pretending to be a woman. Trans activist Faye Johnstone announced his inclusion in the campaign this week with this video. Listen.
My name is Faye Johnstone. I'm the executive director of Wisdom to Action. We can create a world where everyone is able to live in public space as their honest and authentic selves. See the women changing how we see the future at Hershey's Canada.
Now, it's already as absurd and as insulting as it can possibly get for a major corporate brand to make this man, who, by the way, also looks and sounds like a man, a representative of women. But a glance at Johnstone's history and at his social media posts tells an even darker story. In fact, Hershey has inadvertently provided us with, I think, a very revealing illustration of how trans activists are made and what they do with the privilege that their self-identity affords them. This was not the company's intention to give us this lesson. We can assume that it wasn't, but they have given us this instructive case study in any case. So it's worth, I think, investigating to see what we can learn from it. So follow with me briefly as we go through the story of Faye Johnstone. And we go all the way back to a few years ago to 2014 and 2015. Back then, Faye Johnstone, then known as Zach, was posting on Instagram with hashtags like gay boy and proud slut. In fact, he even posted a public acknowledgement of, because at the time he identified as a gay man, and around that same time he posted a public acknowledgement of an apology for his, quote, cis privilege, begging forgiveness for taking up space as a queer male. In that 2015 post, this is what he wrote. This was Zach. He says, I want to acknowledge my own cis privilege and say that across the board, white queer men like myself take up space that marginalizes the most oppressed and diverse members of our community. Now, it's quite a strange thing to see yourself as merely taking up space, but this is what leftist identity politics entails if you're a white male. But then an interesting thing happened. After taking some women's history classes and reading some feminist literature and confronting his cis privilege some more, all this is documented on his Instagram page, Zach eventually decided that, it turns out he's not cis at all. He was no longer taking up space, nor did he owe any apologies. Over the next few years, he would identify as femme and, quote, non-binary, and then land eventually on trans. It didn't take him very long after discovering his non-cis identity to monetize it. He put up another Instagram post in, I think it was 2017, advertising himself as a professional queer, quote unquote, and seeking honorariums and paid gigs. Magically, Johnstone was now in a position to not only make money off of this identity, but to lecture the cis allies that he was just identifying himself with like 5 seconds ago. In 2017, he posted this, quote, allyship means taking cisgender heterosexual spaces and making them queer and trans inclusive. It means not expecting trans and non-binary people to have to educate everyone around them every day and in every new space. It means being there and being consistent. So many allies talk a big game, but we need you to do more than talk. This is a man who had once, not long before, felt the need to apologize for taking up space. Now he was blaming others for taking up space that belonged to him. How quickly can a white male go from apologizing for his privilege to scolding other people for theirs? All you have to do is put on a dress. It's that simple. And these days, you don't even have to do that much. Johnstone, once the oppressor was now apparently the oppressed, and now makes his living as a professional activist. He also takes full advantage of the victim privilege that he has claimed for himself as he advocates for many horrific things, including putting women in harm's way. Just a few days ago, Johnstone reprimanded someone for saying that male rapists who identify as trans shouldn't be housed in women's prisons. He claimed that trans-identifying male sex offenders must be placed in women's prisons in the name of, quote, trans liberation. The separation of male and female prisoners is not a solution, he said. It bears repeating here and emphasizing. A man who wants to lock women prisoners into cages with male sex offenders and violent rapists is the person who Hershey chose to be a representative of women for Women's History Month. It gets worse. Johnstone has also explicitly advocated for vilifying, quote unquote, his words, women who disagree with gender ideology. He said that such women, TERFs as he calls them, should be shouted down until they, quote, don't dare to speak their views publicly. And this is not new or unique rhetoric coming from him. Back in 2017, he was calling for, quote, militant queers to rise up against his political enemies. Nowadays, Johnstone advocates for mandatory trans-affirming indoctrination of children in public school. A few months ago, he called for school boards to establish, quote, best practices to ensure all students learn about accepting trans people. And as for parents who might object, he believes that, as he stated, that parents don't have absolute rights over their own children. Now, none of these revelations are shocking. They don't even really count as revelations. I mean, of course, this male trans activist hates women and doesn't care if they're put in harm's way. Of course. All male trans activists hate women because they resent and despise the people who authentically belong to an identity group that they covet but will never really be a part of. It's that simple. And also, they're all narcissists. I mean, every single one. That's why they're trans activists. They care about nobody and nothing except their own affirmation. Whatever sacrifices must be made to make them feel affirmed are worth it. And if that means that women have to get raped in prison, as far as they're concerned, they're fine with it. They're more than fine with it. I mean, they hate women, after all, remember. The militant rhetoric, expressly calling for the vilification of their opponents, wishing to make their women too afraid and intimidated to even speak in public. This is also no surprise. It is how trans activists and LGBT activists and leftist activists in general have always operated. You know, while people on the right complain that my rhetoric is too mean, too abrasive, the other side has proudly and explicitly set out to demonize anyone who disagrees with them, and they'll even tell you that's what they're doing. They're not having any conversation about tone. Okay, there's no tone policing going on that side. They all agree. Whatever tone is necessary to harass and terrorize the enemy is the right tone as far as they're concerned. This is how they fight this war, while many on our side are still trying to, play patty cake with these people. It's also not a surprise, though very important to note, how Johnstone settled on his woman identity in the first place. I mean, you could track a similar progression for nearly every young trans activist in the country today, especially since they've all left behind extensive documentation. They've all left behind a paper trail on social media. So we can see how Johnstone came to understand that he was the villain according to his own ideology. As a cisgender, quote unquote, white male, his role was to apologize and to step to the side. He was a warm body taking up space. But nobody wants to see themselves that way. Nobody wants to be that. So over time, he came to see that there's a way around this. He doesn't have to resign himself to his position in the caste system. All he had to do was declare himself something other than male, and a simple declaration is all it takes. And suddenly he finds himself situated at the top of the pyramid. Moments before he was at the bottom, pyramid is flipped on its head. It's as simple as that. It's really no wonder that trans and non-binary identification have risen so sharply. There's lots of social capital and also financial capital to be gained from that identity, and it only takes a snap of the fingers to obtain it. Now, as for Hershey's, It's likely that the company didn't know many of these background details when they appointed Faye Johnstone their spokesman, or a spokeswoman, as they would claim. They, that certainly isn't meant to be an excuse for the company. Not at all. The point is that they wouldn't have done any background research or looked into this guy at all. All they needed to know is that he's trans. And that automatically makes him above reproach. And any attempt to investigate his background or vet him or look into his past statements would be an affront against him. So I can guarantee you that they specifically decided not to do that. This is what the law of DEI dictates. And Hershey's, like most other corporations, is simply following that law. And now they should suffer the consequences for it. I mean, we have to start really penalizing these corporations for their unthinking allegiance to this perverse, twisted ideology. Nobody needs Hershey's, right? We could all go the rest of our lives and never touch another one of their products. And it would require nothing of us. It would require no sacrifice at all. Like, it would not affect all the people who are disgusted by what Hershey's has done here. If all of us just said, okay, well, I'm never eating anything that Hershey makes ever again, it would be a major win in the culture. And also it would not affect our lifestyles at all. We could easily do it. And so that's what we need to do. One great way to make them pay for their wokeness is to turn to the alternatives. But what are the alternatives? Well, funny you should ask that. Here's the report from the Daily Wire. Hershey's chose the first day of Women's History Month to insult all women and rational men by introducing a gender dysphoric man who claims to be female as one of the faces of its commemorative She Bar. It even rolled out a social media ad with Faye Johnstone gushing about how she and other women are changing how we see the future. It was too much for the Daily Wire co-founder Jeremy Boring, who has built a reputation for taking on woke companies and offering alternatives to their insulted customers. Already a razor magnate, and soon-to-be producer of wholesome children's content, Boring is now a chocolatier. Is that what we call people who make chocolate? I guess so. After a deluge of Twitter users appealed to him to offer another choice. Fine, Boring tweeted early Friday, I'll do it, introducing Jeremy's chocolate. Yes, it's real. We have two kinds, he, him, and she, her. One of them has nuts. If you need me to tell you which one, keep buying Hershey's. So that's the news. This is a real thing that now exists, that now there is Jeremy's chocolates. And you can go to IHateHersheys.com and you can find the website, and you can find the options for the chocolate bar. Right now, it looks like there are just the two options, but if we've learned anything from Jeremy's razors, we know that there will be many more options still to come. Now, it's a meme now, right, on social media, that every time a company goes woke, everyone always says, oh, well, I guess the Daily Wire is going to make their own version. But it's not just a meme, it's real life. We are bringing the memes to life here at the Daily Wire, and I'm very proud of that. And it's a great thing for two reasons. Okay, one is like the obvious one, that the serious one, that it is important to build alternatives. And, you know, it makes it even easier on the consumer end to move away from these woke companies if those alternatives exist, which is why we're building them. And it should be really easy because, as I said, even without the alternative, there's no reason, like nobody needs Hershey's. And so if we don't need you, we don't need you. And if you're going to come and spit in our faces, then, I mean, how much, disrespect would we have to have for ourselves to continue buying this product that we don't need and could easily go without from a company that is directly spitting in our faces? But it becomes all the easier when there are these alternatives that we have now. And now we have Jeremy's chocolates. But also, number two, the second thing is that it is great trolling. And I do think that there's a virtue in trolling. I've talked about this recently, that, you know, we can engage the left, we can fight back, and, you know, on many different levels. There's legislation, there's, you know, of course you have to make the arguments, you have to do all these things. But there is a real virtue of trolling too, and of mockery. Because these people are, and what they represent is, it's what they, their ideology is poisonous and it's destructive, but it's also completely ludicrous. And we can't lose sight of that. That's part of the trolling, is to point that out. That's part of the mockery, is to point that out. And that's why there's real value in it.